Yoba, what's up and what's happening? Today, I'd like to discuss my personal journey into nutrition and how it all began for me. My fitness and nutrition journey has taken me on many different paths, and I am grateful for all of them. I hope that this video will inspire you and also want you to find out more about your own personal health, nutrition, and also your fitness. Okay, play the intro. So for me personally, I was actually quite a late bloomer when it came to fitness. When I was at school, I wasn't really the type of kid that did that much sports or that much after school activity. In fact, to be honest with you, I was probably a little bit chubby, like a fat kid. And it wasn't necessarily that I was completely inactive. However, I certainly was carrying a little bit more weight than I probably should have been. However, when I was 8 years old, I was diagnosed with a autoimmune disease, which was called ulcerative colitis. And unfortunately, that autoimmune disease, ulcerative colitis, did affect my childhood or interrupt my childhood to some degree, as it meant spending quite a lot of time in hospital. Now, saying that, when I was a teenager, when I was between 15 and 16 years old, I had a really, really bad bout of ulcerative colitis, which basically rendered me in hospital for roughly 6, maybe 7 weeks, which is actually quite a long time for an individual to be in hospital, and also for a young man such as myself, missing college, missing my friends, and missing my social life. And once I came away from hospital, I was really kind of determined to turn things around. I think the bout in hospital for such a long stint of time had sort of altered my outlook on how I wanted things to be. And I was going to try and take charge of my body. I was going to try and take charge of my diet and also my fitness. And I had read an article at some point, I don't quite know when that was, but I had read an article about people who suffer with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis disease. And the article basically stated that if you did fitness or you did some form of fitness, but they felt that the endorphins that were released, the good feeling hormones that were released from fitness and exercise, was actually somewhat correlated or linked to bettering sufferers of ulcerative colitis. Which to me, I thought to myself, fantastic, that's exactly what I want. I want to be able to feel better, feel fitter, and try and start eating healthy again. And in that time, I probably was eating foods that I really sort of liked, such as, pizzas, chips, burgers. Obviously, I had home cooked meals from my mum, but at the same time, I was kind of pretty much eating whatever I wanted to. So on the first stint of this journey for me personally, I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to cut my weight down, and I also wanted to get fitter. So the way that I started to get fitter was I started to run maybe 2 to 3 times a week. And at first it was probably only maybe no more than 3 to 4 kilometers or 1 or 2 miles. And I then just started to curb the types of foods that I was normally going for. So I'd stay away from the sweets, the snacky foods, things like that. And it had a really positive effect at first. Thinking back on it now, when I came out of hospital, because I'd been lying in a bed for such a long time, I'd been lying in a bed for roughly, as I say, 6 to 7 weeks, I'd actually lost quite a lot of overall weight. My body mass had actually shrunk because I'd been in a hospital bed for such a long time. And when I came out of hospital, I was quite weak. But also for the first time in my life, I was probably quite slim. And people were commenting on that. People were commenting on the fact that I looked sort of skinnier or slimmer. And thinking about it now, they were probably telling me that I looked too thin or too skinny, as if had been unwell, which I had been. But in my mind, that had created a positive effect for me personally, and I felt that I wanted to kind of keep doing that to myself, to keep trying to lose weight, or at least try and keep that weight off and not return back to the previous weight I had been before I became unwell. So basically, my initial instinct was to try and change my diet to some degree, and also to try and exercise more. And I can't really remember the period of time or how it happened, but I'd probably say within 6 months, I had probably increased my exercise amount to every single day. And I was either cycling, swimming, or running. And I was certainly getting very, very fit. But I was starting to overtrain. I was starting to train for longer and longer periods of time. At the same time as all this going on, and my mum will remember this, I started to change my food habits mainly. Not necessarily the food that I was eating, but more the habits of what I was doing. So I was kind of skipping a meal in the afternoon, and in the morning I was eating a bowl of cereal, and I kind of can't believe I did this, but I was eating a bowl of cereal and I was mixing the cereal with part skimmed milk. So over here in the UK, we've got like 0% fat milk. And I was having skimmed milk and tap water, which sounds absolutely foul now, but that's what I was eating. So I was eating kind of a very, very low calorie breakfast. And I think I was possibly putting a lot of water into a cereal to make the volume more, so it would fill me up for a longer period of time. Also, in the evenings when I would eat with my mum at home, she would always cook a meal, and we would always eat our dinner in the living room, and we would watch TV. Now, when my mum was watching the television, what I would do is I would take the food that she had prepared for me and I would push it underneath my plate and hide it in between the tray that sits on your lap, because we basically ate our dinners in front of the television. But I'd start to put my food underneath the plate and hide it, and I'd squash the plate down between the tray and the plate and the food in the middle, to try and conceal. And then once I'd finished my meal, or I told my mum that I finished my meal, I would then go up into the kitchen and dispose the food into the kitchen waste bin, and get rid of the food that way. So that in my mind, I was thinking that I haven't eaten that food, and therefore I'm not going to get fat, because that was the one thing that I was kind of scared of after being so unwell and coming out of hospital and losing all this weight. My fear really was that I was going to put weight back on and get fat, which is not what I wanted to do. Now, when my problem started with eating, I probably had just started college. And for me personally, where I had been unwell when I was late 15, early 16 years of age, college in the UK had started for me. And where college had started, I had probably missed the first month to month and a half of college, and therefore I was actually running a little bit behind when I did finally catch up with my peers, my colleagues, and just general life. And so therefore it became very important to me to get myself into a routine with my fitness and my nutrition. And that's probably when my friends started to notice that I was actually probably too skinny, losing too much weight, and my eating habits became more strange to them, and they didn't quite understand what I was doing or why I was doing it. Good examples of this would be that when they were eating kind of their lunch, I'd kind of only be eating an apple, and and that'd probably be the most I'd have, possibly a cereal bar. And that would be throughout my entire day. So, and it got to the point where I was kind of bringing in tins of low calorie soup, and I was eating this low calorie soup out of the tin with a spoon, which, thinking back on it now, is really, really strange. But you have to remember that I had got myself into a mindset where I was not going to put on any weight. And my only real interest at that time was to make sure that I didn't put any weight on, and also that I exercised every single day to a vast extent. We're talking, 2 to 3 hours a day of exercise. Now, as you can imagine, now with all of this going on, by the time I got to the age of about 18, I got to the point where I was quite visibly malnourished and just not healthy at all. My exercise had become basically an addiction, and I had joined the local gym. So I was going to the gym, I was running. Sometimes I was running to the gym, having a gym workout, and then running back. And all of it in my mind was for the aid. Originally, it was for the aid of my ulcerative colitis, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, was the disease that I suffered with. However, it had become more of a problem than that. It had become more of a problem for my friends, my family. It wasn't really a problem for me. It was something that it wasn't really a problem for me. It was definitely something that I really wanted to do. And, it's strange how the brain works, but it's something that I actually got a lot of pleasure from. I got a lot of pleasure from over-exercising, under-eating, and feeling malnourished, because the aesthetic look that it gave my mindset or gave me, this kind of very, very, very skinny, and as I say, malnourished individual, was kind of pleasing to my mind's eye. Whilst this was going on, obviously I was still suffering with ulcerative colitis. However, ulcerative colitis for me personally was kind of a strange beast. Sometimes it would rear its ugly head, and then sometimes it would lay dormant for many, many months, if not years. And I had actually been really lucky with my ulcerative colitis after my last stint in hospital. And I probably didn't suffer with a bout of ulcerative colitis for probably about 2 years. And I had to go for a medication review. In that medication review, the doctor was basically trying to look at my weight and also the amount of tablets that I was having at the time. And because I had lost so much weight, and I think I had gone from roughly 11.5 stone, I'm not quite sure how that much it would be in pounds, but I probably went from roughly 72 to 74 kilograms. And I dropped all the way down to 7.5 stone. And I've got no idea what that is in kilos. I'll put that up on the screen. So my doctor, who had been my doctor since my childhood, basically was incredibly worried about me and gave me quite a strict telling off. And she said that basically we're going to have to change all of your medication. And she sat down and did a review with me, and she asked me some very specific certain questions. And she said that she was going to refer me to a psychiatrist because she believed that I was suffering with anorexia. Now, for me to hear that at 18 years old, so this has now been roughly about 2 years, I've been living this habitual lifestyle of under-eating and over-exercising. For me to hear that at 18 years old, to be labelled with basically a mental disease, which I didn't really class it as at the time, but looking back at it, it definitely was a fixed mentality that I had taught myself, was kind of quite upsetting. And I think it was more the word anorexia, because I was relatively intelligent enough to know that that isn't good. That's not a good place to be in. And the fact I've now got to commit my time to going to see some form of psychotherapist to be analysed and to ask why that I'm doing this to myself, it kind of all just spiraled for me. So my initial reaction after having that doctor's appointment was to basically say, right, I'm not going to do this to myself anymore. I don't want to be this sort of skinny person. And actually thinking about it, like, why the hell have I done this to myself? Like, for some reason, having that one conversation with that doctor had this just reaction, this spark in my brain. And I just thought to myself, am I really, anorexic? Am I really doing this to myself? So my first initial response was to go home, and my mum had made a cake for me, or she'd made a cake of some sort, and she had saved some. So she cut some aside for me and left it in some tinfoil. And I wrapped it up in a tinfoil and threw it in the bin. And then I went to go and have this doctor's appointment. And then when I got back from the doctor's appointment, I remember rummaging back for that bin and opening up the tinfoil and just eating this this cake. And a part of it I forgot to mention is that throughout this 2-year period of creating these really bad eating habits, I had huge amounts of binging periods where I just could not stop eating. And that's obviously because I was getting so malnourished and so hungry, overwhelmingly hungry, that I just had to basically binge as much as I could possibly fit in at that time. And once I started, I just could not stop. It was basically just an ongoing feast out of my mum's fridge and probably her cupboards as well. So let's fast forward a little bit. I've had the doctor's review, and she's basically told me that she believes I'm suffering with anorexia, and I've been booked in to go and see these mental health coaches or mental health coach, which I actually didn't do. I didn't turn up to the appointments, and I didn't follow through. I didn't follow up with those appointments because I generally believed that I was going to do it myself. I was going to reverse this problem myself. And I think I would say that 2 things happened for me. The first thing is that I did actually start to eat a little bit better. That was the first thing. And the second thing was that I was on my way to university. And when I got to university, I had this sudden freedom. I no longer was at home. I no longer knew anybody, or I didn't know anyone when I got to university, as most of us don't. And so for me, it felt like it was an opportunity to slightly reinvent myself. And within that reinvention, I went back downhill, with the poor eating habits and bad food choices. But because university, as we all know, has got a drinking culture behind it, I ended up getting into a position where I was drinking too much, not eating enough, and still exercising every single day, between 90 minutes and possibly 2 hours easily every single day. This in turn made me incredibly unwell and very ill, which then sparked a new cycle of ulcerative colitis. So I had another bout of this ulcerative colitis disease that I suffer from, and was in a lot of pain, and unfortunately missed a few months worth of university. I had to go home and be ill at home because I couldn't stay at university. Once I had recovered from my bout of ulcerative colitis, which is actually the last bout of ulcerative colitis I've had in my life, and I'm now 34, and I believe that I probably had that bout when I was roughly 20 years old. So I think I've probably been free of that disease, or the effects that disease can have on you, for probably 14, maybe 15 years. However, when I was at university and I was drinking too much, I wasn't eating enough, I was over exercising. And when I say about exercising, I mean sort of running on treadmills, cycling for long periods of time, going to the gym, going swimming in the public pool, but everything was to the nth degree. Like it was almost, too much for most people to handle. And I'd come away from those sessions, those exercise sessions, absolutely shattered and drained. However, there were two things that changed for me when I was at university when it came to exercise. And the first thing is that I had spent an extra year at college. Some of it was to do with the fact that I'd missed my first year of college. And so I had to do 3 years at college, when in the UK, we normally do 2 years before we go to university when we're doing our A-levels. But for me, I had to take an extra third year. And when I got to university, I was obviously a year, possibly even 2 or a year and a half to 2 years older than some of the other guys that were on the same course as me. And the one thing that I had noticed was the muscularity and the maturity in terms of my peers' fitness and their health and their overall general well-being was a lot better than mine. And that really did play on my mindset quite a lot. And when training with these guys and how strong they were and how physically in shape they were, I decided that I was going to actually change my stance on how I exercised. And how I had been exercising before was probably one of the main key reasons why I was so malnourished, because I was expending huge amounts of energy per session and obviously not replenishing that energy with food, either before, during, or after those sessions. The second thing that happened to me is that when I went into my third year at university, I probably still had traits of someone who'd been suffering with habitual eating patterns that were obviously not good or that weren't ideal. But I had worked through a lot of my habits and tried to eradicate some of them. But the last thing that happened to me is that in my third year, I met an individual guy that I live with, and he was really into his weight training. And I had never really considered weight training up until then. I didn't really want to get bulky. I didn't really want to get big. That wasn't my thing. That was almost what I had been trying to steer clear from. But he convinced me that, to start lifting weights and to start trying to tone up a bit, putting a little bit of muscle onto my frame was actually a really good and healthy thing to do. And he was very encouraging. And with his basic knowledge and no knowledge at all from my point of view, we trained together for the best part of probably 10 months. And we trained together 4 to 5 times a week, and we were both quite dedicated to it. And then I naturally then started to look at choosing better foods and choosing to eat better. And because I was choosing to eat better, I actually started to put on quite a decent amount of muscle tissue, kind of the newbie gains at the beginning of my weightlifting career. From this, I then started to pick up blogs, newspaper articles, magazines, whatever I possibly could to be able to get an extra edge on my health, my diet, my nutrition. And all of a sudden, those things became really, really important to me. And as I was starting to research, and the things that I had taught myself were incorrect. Things that I thought were correct, or things that I had taught myself, actually had no practical evidence behind them. I had no understanding of nutrition, and I had a very, very basic understanding of exercise other than just to run or to cycle. Once I started my weightlifting career or weightlifting program, things changed for me quite dramatically. The research that I did into how to gain more muscle tissue, how to be healthier, how to have that fantastic body that you want, almost like a cover model. And in my mind's eye, I had actually been trying to achieve that perfect beach body. But actually, in reality, what I needed to do was focus on the food that I was choosing to eat and the amount of food that I was choosing to eat, and also the type of exercise that I was doing. So rather than just doing one type of exercise, which is basically kind of more running and cycling, which is sort of athletics, I actually looked to doing more strengthening and conditioning of my body. However, eating disorders and anorexia for me were a strange time in my youth, for sure. But one thing that I would say about those habits is that they kind of always stuck with me. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think that what I actually gained from those habits, some of them still stay with me. Some of those traits of watching your portion sizes, trying to control your diet, not to the point where it's painful for some people to watch, but to the point where you're being strict. You know, you've got a routine, you've got a regime with the food and exercise, the food that you eat and the exercise that you do. I think also when someone is quite easily led to become addicted to something, and that's definitely one of my traits, I can be quite driven. The one thing that I would say personally, as someone who has suffered with an eating disorder and also anorexia, is that you have a very focused mindset. And with that focused mindset, I actually turned it on its head, and I actually addressed my nutrition and addressed my exercise. And for that, I'm actually incredibly grateful for the experience that I had with the eating disorder and also anorexia. In the short term, I really punished myself. I really gave myself a good seeing to in terms of not eating properly, overtraining, and really, to be honest with you, not enjoying my youth. But in the long term, it actually was a great teacher for me personally, and something that I was able to catch in enough time where it didn't become a lifetime habit, which I think it could have very easily if I hadn't have had that conversation with my doctor when I was 18 years old. I feel that it taught me how to manage food, how to understand food, and how to understand nutrition, and that it gave me a passion. And that passion, or learning nutrition and learning exercise, I've always felt is something that is bigger than me. It's a bigger entity of life, and that for me, I always want to serve it because it is that bigger entity that you can obtain fantastic results. And as long as you look after your health and your well-being, your body will repay you back in kind, tenfold. So I am oddly grateful for having my autoimmune disease. I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm grateful for having terrible eating habits or anorexia, but I would say that they did give me a drive. They did give me a passion for my health and my well-being. Today, I am very much a different person, and I see food in a very different light. However, I do know that there are people out there who struggle with bad eating patterns, and they don't necessarily have to be people who suffer with anorexia or bulimia. There are lots of different types of disorders, and sometimes I don't think people always know that they are suffering from bad eating habits, and that's why they're not losing weight, or that's why they're not maybe even happy, because I do believe that food feeds the body and the brain, and they're both kind of interlinked in that way. So I made this video to basically send you guys a message to say that if you are struggling with your nutrition, but you do want to improve, or you do want to try and benefit yourself in whatever category, when it comes to your health and general well-being, as long as you want to strive for that, you will succeed. The first attempts, when you try something new, when you try a new pattern of eating, or if you try and get rid of an old habit and it keeps creeping back in, as long as you persist, as long as you keep trying to make a difference for yourself, then you will succeed. I hope that everybody sees the benefit in choosing a better lifestyle through exercise and also better nutrition. And hopefully you guys will start to realize that by investing in your health, in your fitness, in the foods that you choose to eat, your body will pay you back in dividends many, many times over. And I'll leave you with this. When I'm talking with my clients, I often have to remind them that the body they live in is their first home and is far more valuable than any home that they will ever own. And I hope that you guys realize the value in your body and also in your mental well-being. So guys, as always, I hope you found this video helpful. Always remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and click that little bell for a new notification. I'll see you next time on
It's the Yo Party Week.